Hello and welcome to today's screencast on types of methods of practice. Today's focus is going to be looking specifically at massed and distributed practice. So last time we had a look at fixed and variable. As always, our focus within practice types is having a look at the characteristics, for example, how we describe them and giving some sporting examples of them in use. Second thing we have to do is then specifically explain the advantages or how they can be used effectively. Okay, so as always, when evaluating, we will need to follow this process where we look at the stage of learning, the practice type be most effective for, the classification of skill be most effective for, and then something specific that will enable us to get marks on top. Okay, so that's how we're going to go about it. Let's have a look at our practice types today then. Okay, so we've got mass practice. So massed practice then, to start us off, what is it? Okay, so if I just show you here, and you could just listen for a second. If this is a basketball player doing a free throw, okay, sometimes called a set shot if it wasn't in the specific setup, but we'll call it a free throw at this point. Okay, so a free throw in basketball then, as it's coming from here. Now this is going to be shot and it's going to go hopefully into there. If it was a massed practice, in order to do this, you would have to continuously repeat the free throw over and over again. So what you might have, a basket of balls here. You might have someone behind here who's just getting the ball and throwing it back. But ultimately, if it's mass practice, you continuously practice a skill without breaks. In this case, if we imagine a free throw, you might have done it yourself, or you just keep practicing. You might move around to different parts of the court. If you want to practice from different areas, it could be any shooting. We're going to use free throws as the example. We must explain what a mass practice is to start with. So if we start off here then, so mass practice is continuous practice without breaks. Okay, so or with very few breaks. So you just keep practicing over and over and over again. And I'll give an example here. For example, practicing a free throw continuously. That could be one way of using it. Okay, now other things you might use alongside this, I've given some examples of particular sporting actions that people tend to practice in massed or blocked practice. For example, archery shots and darts throws. Okay, so you might have people practicing those over and over and over again. And if you do that, it gives you some really advantages that we'll talk about in a second. Now from here, let's flip over to distributed practice then. So when we talk about distributed practice, basically what it means is our practice blocks are distributed. There is a space between our practices. So if you imagine now someone doing a triple jump, how it might work is they run up, do a hop, do the step, do the jump. Once they've done the run up, the hop, the step and the jump, they then have a break. Okay, and in that break, they might receive some feedback from a coach, for example, who might say, right, you need to concentrate on your run up. You're not running up from far enough. You need to focus on your hop. Okay, you're not getting enough power off your hop. And then in that period, when you're having a break and some feedback, then you have another go. So you run up, hop, step, jump. Again, you then have or you might do 5 reps of the run up, hop, step, jump, and then you have some feedback from the coach. But ultimately, if you distribute a practice, it means you space the practice. So you have a period of practice followed by a rest or a break. Okay, so in terms of how I've asked you to describe this on here, practice with breaks. And the breaks are used for feedback, e.g. a coach telling you what you need to improve on. As we know, that is extrinsic feedback. And then on top of that, other things that people tend to do in this break is mental rehearsal. Okay, so they might just have a quick go through, think in their head, what could I need to improve? Okay, as we've talked about before, we're talking about the stages of learning, trying to create that mental picture. Okay, so hopefully people can see how that would work. So if you imagine distributed practice, then practice with breaks, and the breaks are used for feedback and mental rehearsal. So if we have a look into here then, example I'll put in here, practicing a triple jump and having a break, and then practicing again, having a break. You could change this if you wanted to, have practicing the triple jump 5 times, 3 times. Once you've done that, you have a break, okay? And then once you've had that break, the coach might give you some feedback. You might try and mentally rehearse how that skill looks, and then you have another go. Other examples of things that tend to use, really useful for distributed practice, you'd have things such as sprint starts, that, really explosive period, and then you have a little kind of maybe have a few goes at it, and then you stop, and then a coach might give you some feedback, or you might start to rehearse in your head what you could do better. Okay, so that's something we'll have a look at there. Hopefully you can see how that would work. For those two there. So there are 2 practice types. We've got massed, distributed. One, massed, as it sounds, massed, it's blocked together. You practice continuously without breaks. Distributed, you distribute the practice with breaks. Okay, so in this case, we've got that for feedback and mental rehearsal. These are just two examples. To be honest, you could use any examples as long as you make sure your example explains that there is a break or there isn't a break, if that makes sense. Okay, so let's have a look then. In terms of evaluating it, as always, we have to have a look at the stage of learning we think that the practice type will be most effective for, the classification of skill we think it's most effective for, and also we will have a look at something specific in terms of an advantage. Okay, so let's have a look onto here then. Let's start off with the uses of massed practice. So as we've got up onto here, I've given you an example here. You've got it up here, so you can just keep looking up here if you want to have a look at the description of massed practice. Continuously practicing something without breaks, for example, a free throw here. So what are the advantages then? Okay, now the first things first, if we start off and say, who is massed practice most effective for in terms of stages of learning? Now, I can understand people going off in two angles here, but I'm going to tell you what you're going to put and why you're going to put it. Okay, so first things, if we look at our stage of learning, the stage of learning massed practice is most effective for is performers in the autonomous stage of learning. And the reason is, in order to repeat, continuously practice over and over again without breaks requires high motivation. So therefore, that is why it is linked to the autonomous stage of learning. Now, I could understand why people would think, well, mass practice, actually, that could be quite good for a cognitive stage learning because they could then groove the skill or whatever. But the problem is, when you ask a cognitive stage learner to repeat something continuously without breaks over and over again, they haven't got the motivation to stick with it. Okay, so what I'm going to ask you to do then is to say, when we see here mass practice, I mean, you might have heard of people like Johnny Wilkinson going out and kicking continuously. David Beckham, back in the day, I remember thinking about his free kicks, and he used to go out and practice free kick after free kick after free kick after free kick outside the area and trying to hit the target. And you hear about this all the time, so it tends to be something that is linked to autonomous stage learners because they have high motivation. Now, there's something in terms of the classification of skill mass practice is most effective for. In order for mass practice, in order to continuously practice something and repeat it over and over again, you need the skill to be short in duration. If it's going to be short in duration, you need it to have a clear beginning and a clear end. That is what makes mass practice most effective. If it was something that was a really continuous practice, a continuous skill, that went on and on and on, it'd be very difficult to practice it over and over again because it wouldn't start and finish. So we need skills that have a clear beginning and end. Free throw, you have it in your hand, you shoot, it's gone. Start, end, finished. So what we look for in this is it is most effective for discrete skills, okay, because they have a clear beginning and end. And the final thing with regard to mass practice, if you do mass practice, e.g. you continuously practice without breaks, this will lead to you overlearning, or at least it overlearns the motor program. Okay, so what this means, overlearn, as we looked at with fixed practice, overlearn is a word. Another word you can use for this is groove. So you get in the groove of the motor program, which is the movement plan in your long-term memory. Okay, so the more you practice something over and over again, continuously without breaks, this will overlearn the motor program in your long-term memory, which is really useful to keep it there, for future reference points. Okay, so let's have a look very quickly at the disadvantages of mass practice then. I'm sure you might be able to think of some things on here. If you're continuously practicing without breaks, what we can remember is pretty similar to fixed practice in a way. The downside is it can be boring and demotivating for performers in the cognitive stage of learning. That, I think the clue is in continuous practice without breaks. Okay, so we've just got to make sure we can have our specific bit of information here with regard to demotivating and boring for the cognitive stage of learning. So hopefully people can see how that would work, and that is our section complete on mass practice. Okay, so that's mass practice, continuously practicing over and over again without breaks. Let's have a look at distributed then. Okay, so distributed practice, I've given you one example. As I've said, you could use absolutely any example as long as you had a period of working, practice, and then you have breaks, followed by work, breaks, followed by work, breaks, or practice, breaks. And you continuously practice something, but then you have a break. Practice something, then have a break. That's why it's distributed. So let's have a look then. As always, in order to get our evaluation points across, we need to follow this pattern. So let's have a look at this. So we should be aware now of the stage of learning, because usually these tend to work in opposition. So who is going to need a break to get feedback externally from a coach? Okay, hopefully we can work that out. So distributed practice then is most effective for performance in the cognitive stage of learning, and we'll have a look specifically at the terminology behind why in a second. And in terms of classification of skill, I don't know if you've noticed this, but when you're going to do something, if you're going to need a break, okay, maybe for mental rehearsal, you might also need it for some physical break. So I think when you're looking at this, you should really be linking distributed practice to being most effective for skills that are gross and complex. Okay, so if you look at a triple jump, for example, that is gross. You're using large muscle movements. On top of that, it's complex because you're having to process 4 parts of a movement and put it together. Okay, so because it's complex, that allows you then to use that break period, okay, to use mental rehearsal, to visualize it, and it also allows you to get some feedback from the coach. So these two here, I think, it makes a lot of sense. Okay, so gross and complex as the skills that it's most effective for. Okay, so final thing then, and this kind of almost links back to this bit here. So if you consider having a distributed practice and you having those breaks, it's really effective for people in the cognitive stage of learning. Now what I'm going to ask you to do for this, because you never know how you're going to get the question, is to repeat what's in the description. So the reason why this is most effective is because the breaks give coaches opportunity to give extrinsic feedback, and also it allows the mental rehearsal. So I'm going to ask you to repeat the part of the description here so that you guarantee you get the marks, just depending on what type of question you get, whether it's describe the practice type or if it's evaluate the effectiveness of or describe the use of the practice type. So I'm just going to put that in there as a double as the specific period for what the breaks allow. Okay, so we've talked about that before, so let's have a quick look then. Next thing we have to look at is the disadvantages. So if you imagine doing the triple jump 3 times, then having a break. The break, or the length of the break, or the disruption within the break can have a negative effect on performance. So if you imagine your break was too long, okay, so you do a triple jump 3 times and then you have a break. Now following that, if you consider what is the problem if that break is too long? Well, there's a couple of things. Firstly, it can disrupt the fluency of the triple jump. It's hard enough to put those 4 moves together, the run up, the hop, the step, the jump. If you keep having too many breaks and they're too long, okay, this can disrupt the fluency. Not only that, if you imagine sometimes when you're doing something, you feel like you're getting into the flow of it, you develop and then people keep giving you breaks and the breaks are really long. People's attention starts to wander, okay, and this then leads to a lack of motivation. So if the breaks are too long, it can be demotivating for the performer, okay, and I'm sure you have experienced that where you're doing something, you feel like you're getting the hang of it, and then people keep stopping you and you don't get a chance to carry on with it, and you start to get demotivated because you've had too much of a break. Okay, so I'm sure you've all experienced that in some way. So there we go, there are key sections, so hopefully people can apply those. Again, lots of revisiting previous knowledge with regard to stage of learning, classification of skills, and then making sure we know something specific about the fact that distributed practice involves practice with breaks. Okay, and if we know why we have those breaks, we get our specific point there. Okay, hopefully you can see how that's going. And yes, good notes, please. Make sure your Cornell notes, the questions you're interrogating, as always, are going into the evaluation points and not just the descriptions. So important. We've got to make sure we can get those evaluation points and we are questioning them so that we have a better understanding of that process. Okay, thanks very much.